Today, as the Trump administration continues to crack down on hundreds of immigrants, major questions surround who is allowed to stay in the U.S.
Plus, FEMA pulls millions from New York, what that could mean for protection from future storms.
And happening now, right here on campus, candidates for New York City Mayor make their case to voters.
The stories shaping our city and the world. Coming up on CJS News. Good afternoon. Welcome to CJS News. I'm Chiara Schmid.
And I'm Isabella Japal. Here are our top stories. A federal judge in Louisiana has ruled that Columbia University activist Mahmoud Khalil can be deported. The 30-year-old Columbia University graduate and lawful permanent U.S. resident was detained by ICE last month for his involvement in pro-Palestinian protests on the school's campus during spring of 2024. Secretary of State Marco Rubio ordered Khalil's deportation under the Immigration Nationality Act of 1952, which gives the Secretary of State the authority to remove non-citizens whose presence is deemed harmful to the United States' foreign interests. Notably, Khalil has not been charged of any crime. However, if deported, he faces separation from his wife, a U.S. citizen. This decision followed a series of deportation rulings that came over the past week. The U.S. Supreme Court upheld President Trump's order to deport more than 200 Venezuelan migrants last week. The group will be sent to the Center for Terrorism Confinement in El Salvador under the authority of the Alien Enemies Act. This ruling comes just days after a federal judge blocked the Trump administration's attempt to end temporary protected status for approximately 600,000 Venezuelans currently residing in the United States. The Venezuelan immigrants in question have been under scrutiny from the Trump administration for alleged ties to a Venezuelan gang.
Turning now to news we use all the time, the weather report. Much of the weather data and information we all rely on comes from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. But NOAA is facing significant budget cuts. Reporter CJ Haddad is live in Central Park. CJ?
Thanks, Kiara. I'm standing in front of NOAA's Central Park weather station. The agency is facing a potential 25% funding cut that would kneecap its workforce and its research departments. Experts are worried about what that means for the forecast that we all rely on.
Numbers coming down significantly from the 60s.
That's NBC4's Dave Price, a familiar face to many New Yorkers who rely on his weather forecasts. But who does he rely on to know what tomorrow's weather will be? Price, along with countless private sector forecasters, gets much of his data from the National Weather Service, which has been telling Americans about rain or shine for free since 1871.
We use this data second by second when there's severe weather. That's how reliant we are on this, because public safety is really what this boils down to.
By using satellites and weather balloons, the National Weather Service gathers up-to-the-minute data and distributes it widely to meteorologists across the country and to the cell phones of everyday Americans. But now, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the parent agency of the National Weather Service, is facing steep cuts ordered by DOGE. Hundreds of NOAA workers were recently fired, many of them forecasters. Dr. Rick Spinrad, the former head of NOAA, called the cuts nothing less than life-threatening.
And don't forget, we're getting into tornado season. We're getting into hurricane season. It's going to be hot this summer. There's going to be floods. There's going to be droughts. We're seeing more and more of these major disasters. So there's no good time to be cutting the weather service, but we're going to see the impacts immediately. People will die. This is not fuzzy. This is real impactful stuff.
These experts say that the potential risk to lives is that forecasts and evacuation warnings could be delayed in severe weather events where minutes and seconds count. Live in Central Park, CJ Haddad for CJS News.
Thanks, CJ. For the first time in years, American and Iranian officials sat down to discuss a potential nuclear deal. They met in Oman over the weekend. 7 years ago, President Trump withdrew the U.S. from the Obama-era nuclear treaty with Iran. So what could these latest talks mean for the future? I spoke with Vali Nasser, an international affairs professor at Johns Hopkins University. It's a very significant step that these two parties are talking again. So what does this moment tell us about the broader state of the U.S.-Iran diplomacy?
Well, it suggests that after a period of great deal of uncertainty, there's once again a possibility of stabilizing what is a very, very dangerous situation. I mean, Iran's nuclear program could be the cause of a war in the Middle East. In fact, it's probably the only issue that could drag the United States into a war in the Middle East. It is happening at a time when the Middle East itself has been in the throes of a much broader crisis over the war in Gaza, the collapse of the regime in Syria, and the United States is also is in a difficult international situation, trying to negotiate peace between Ukraine and Russia, opening a front against Europe and China with its tariff war. So Iran's nuclear program comes in the middle of that. The key question is, can there be a substantive agreement on a next step? That's the most important thing.
I see. So what do you predict? Like, where do you see the U.S.-Iranian relationship go from here?
Well, the relationship will entirely depend on this negotiation process because there's no other track in this relationship. There's no other diplomatic, economic track. This is it. And if this doesn't work out, then, we're looking at escalation of tensions and potentially military conflict, which then would be the defining feature of U.S.-Iran relations for some time. If the negotiation process is successful, then potentially the two countries can arrive at a deal that will de-escalate tensions between them. And that would have to look like something where Iran agrees to reduce its nuclear activities significantly, open its nuclear program to intrusive and extensive international inspection to make sure that it is not moving towards building a weapon. And in exchange, that the United States will lift sanctions and allow Iran to engage to a greater deal in international commerce.
After the talks on Saturday, both sides described the conversation as, quote, constructive. They have agreed to meet again in Rome this weekend.
The Trump administration is cutting off millions of dollars that are supposed to go to the nation's libraries. CJS News reporter Monet Gilbeau joins us live outside the New York Public Library with more on the lawsuit to stop those cuts from happening. Monet?
Thanks, Isabella. This all began once Trump signed an executive order dismantling the agency that supports libraries. Now the American Library Association is suing, and some New Yorkers are worried about their local branches.
Every week, Justine visits her neighborhood library, St. Agnes. Now she worries what could happen to the things she loves here: the books, the space to relax, and the free programs for the community.
I mean, what's so special about libraries is that no matter who you are, where you're from, what you're looking for, everyone's welcome.
The Institute of Museum and Library Services, or IMLS, allocates millions in funding to libraries across the country. But DOJ gutted that agency, which left libraries scrambling.
So there's really a lot of uncertainty of what happens next if the shoe drops and we don't have that funding.
The funding supports a range of essential services, from job assistance to educational resources. The lawsuit says that funding cuts are illegal because Congress hasn't approved them. Because of this, libraries around the country are left on a cliffhanger.
Libraries are relied on as these vital community anchors wherever we are. You can find help with a job search there. You can access the internet there if you don't have broadband access at home. Some libraries have spaces for you to engage in telehealth appointments even. People don't realize just how much the library does in a community until it's gone. Unless you are relying on it yourself.
For many communities, libraries are more than just a building with books. They're central to how people access education and services. But now, with cuts looming, their future remains hazy.
Major publishers sent a letter to Congress calling the cuts an act of monumental neglect, warning that this may undermine the tenets of our democracy. In Midtown, my name is Monet Gilbo, CJS News.
Continuing volatility in the markets over President Trump's tariff plans. On Friday, after Trump said that no industry would be exempt from tariffs, certain tech products were given exemptions. Smartphones, semiconductors, and computers got a reprieve from the 145% tariffs on China. But just yesterday, Trump called those exemptions temporary.
Let's take stock of what happened last week. On Monday, markets plunged in reaction to President Trump's reciprocal tariffs. Tuesday, Canada responded with a 25% retaliatory tariff on certain vehicles made in the U.S. By Wednesday, investors were selling off Treasury bonds. Trump then suspended reciprocal tariffs for 90 days, with China as the only exception. China responded ultimately with a 125% tariff. Trump claims tariffs will help close America's trade deficit, but some experts say it will slow growth and raise prices. Tomorrow, the European Union's retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods goes into effect.
Have you filed your taxes yet? If not, the clock is ticking. Tax day is tomorrow, April 15th. So you've got one more day to get everything in order to avoid penalties. If you're running behind, our correspondent Ali Treswal has some last-minute tips for you. Ali?
Well, Kiara, if that's the case, the IRS recommends filing electronically and taking advantage of their free filing options on their website. If you need more time to complete the paperwork, you can request an extension, which gives you until October 15 to file, but you may face interest and penalties.
Thanks, Ali. So, Isabella, have you filed your taxes yet?
Kiara, thanks for asking, because I haven't. How have you?
Well, I'm right on track.
You heard it here first, folks. Be more like Kiara and not like me. In other news, a D.C. courtroom is packed for day one of Meta's antitrust trial. The government is suing Meta, accusing the company of building a monopoly by buying both Instagram and WhatsApp instead of competing with them. Meta's founder and chief executive Mark Zuckerberg is expected to take the stand. Candidates for mayor came right here to the journalism school today to make their case for the job.
CJS News reporter Ilyana Exaris was at the school's candidate forum and joins us live with more. Ilyana?
Thank you, Kiara. A vision for New York City. That's what today's mayoral forum was called. Candidates Adrian Adams, Michael Blake, Whitney Tilson, and Jim Walden, who attended in person, and Jessica Ramos and Zelnor Myrie, who attended online, each laid out their plans for New York City.
The rollback of DEI is something that we take very, very seriously.
I want to start something called Work NYC, which is a New York City specific work permit, so that folks who are coming here who are trying to work have that ability.
The candidates also discussed homelessness, housing, the Trump administration, and how they would have handled the student protests last year.
When things got out of control, it was creating a very unsafe environment for Jewish students on campus.
Everything that we can do to protect speech, we need to. But we have to have better plans when tempers flare and emotions rise.
What's important is that we keep ICE away from schools, away from churches, away from hospitals, libraries, or any other public institution.
ICE has no business at our schools, our community centers, our places of worship.
Notably absent, Mayor Eric Adams, who's running as an independent, and former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who is running as a Democrat and is currently leading the polls with 39% of the vote. The Democratic primary will be held on June 24th, and the mayoral election is scheduled for November 4th. This will be ranked choice voting, meaning that voters will rank up to 5 candidates in order of preferences. So New Yorkers are preparing for a very busy election season ahead. Back to you.
Thank you, Ilyana. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, canceled a $325 million grant for New York State. That money was supposed to fund projects to reduce hurricane-related flooding.
In a statement from FEMA, the agency called the investment wasteful and politicized. Governor Hochul responded with her own statement, saying, "Cutting funding for communities across New York is short-sighted and a massive risk to public safety." The cuts come as FEMA's future remains uncertain. President Trump has created a council to look into possibly eliminating the agency. Trump has suggested giving money directly to states dealing with natural disasters.
A U.S. Chamber of Commerce study says that every dollar spent on climate resilience saves the economy $13 in damages and cleanup costs.
Can the federal government really influence how a university runs its campus? It's a question now facing Columbia University and potentially other institutions across the country. The Trump administration is considering a legal move that could reshape the relationship between higher education and Washington for years to come. Last week, the Trump administration cut off $250 million from Columbia in federal funding from the National Institute of Health, a massive blow to Columbia's research and medical programs. Now officials are discussing a consent decree with the university that would allow a federal judge to oversee any deal made between the two parties. That, if enacted, would give the Trump administration a say in all major university decisions at Columbia. A Columbia spokeswoman declined to comment on whether the school is open to the consent decree, but confirmed the school is still in active dialogue with the federal government in hopes of restoring its research funding. For the decree to move forward, either the administration or school would need to file a lawsuit, which has not yet happened. The push for federal oversight comes at a tense time. Columbia has been under pressure from the Trump administration to address allegations of anti-Semitism on campus, a factor that prompted last week's funding cuts and investigations. The university has already agreed to several of the administration's demands, such as banning students from wearing masks at protests, hiring 36 on-campus officers with the ability to arrest students, and appointing a new senior provost to oversee the Department of Middle East, South Asian, and African Studies. Last week, the administration froze around $800 million in funding to Northwestern University and more than $1 billion for Cornell University. The consent decree would be a shift not just for Columbia, but for how federal power is exercised in all of higher education.
Golf history was made this weekend as Rory McIlroy won the Masters tournament yesterday at Augusta National Golf Club. McIlroy edged out Justin Rose in a sudden death playoff. It ends his 11-year drought between major titles. McIlroy's win completes a career Grand Slam, a feat only 5 others have achieved in golf history.
And now for our special series, On the Vertical. Stories we tell on social media and right here, from your cell phone to the screen. CJS reporter Mason Leaf has a look at the redesigned subway map and what it means for navigating the city underground.
The MTA is rolling out a brand new subway map, which is a big change for millions of New Yorkers who rely on public transportation every single day.
It's the first major subway map redesign in almost half a century, and the MTA says it's a game changer. It's more modern and user-friendly.
There is no map like this new map to show where you need to go in our system.
Out goes the familiar 1979 design by Michael Hertz, and taking its place, a new map with bold, straight lines, a clean white background, with simplified borough outlines and clear labels for transfer points and accessibility. MTA Chair and CEO Jano Lieber says the map is all about making the system easier to use.
The result is a map that is much easier to read, but also reflects all the enhancements that we've made over the years.
The redesign draws inspiration from the original 1972 New York subway map, famous for its geometric style, but criticized for its lack of accuracy. The new version coming to metro stations keeps the classic train line colors of the Hertz map while using horizontal, vertical, and diagonal lines for better clarity.
This would have been a dream for me when I was starting out my career and my aunt had to take me around and show me how to take the subway.
The MTA plans to roll out the new map and post it in every train station in the coming months. But for those who still prefer the old version, don't worry. The MTA says you can still find it online.
So Mason, we got to hear a lot about what other New Yorkers think about the new map, but let's hear what you think.
Honestly, Isabella, if I'm being completely forthright with you, it's not really for me. It's not my favorite. I prefer the older maps. I think this one's just a bit too colorful, a bit too confusing. The proportions are really, really bizarre if you look at Manhattan and Central Park. And, I think this is a change that I'm not really for.
Thank you. That was very honest.
You're welcome.
All right. Kiara?
And finally today, an historic moment this morning when Blue Origin touched down in West Texas after a 10-minute journey to the edge of space. This was the first all-female crew in outer space. On the spacecraft were Katy Perry, Lauren Sanchez, Gail King, former NASA rocket scientist Aisha Bowe, civil rights activist Amanda Wynn, and film producer Carrie Ann Flynn. That's all for today. Thanks for watching CJS News. I'm Chiara Schmid.
And I'm Isabella Japal. We'll see you next time.